Why do we play video games? It's a question I come back to over and over again when I reflect on the place of games as a medium within the artistic spectrum. Of course, it's a pointless question. What we experience and how we experience it is entirely subjective, and given that games are the most involving medium in which we perceive stories, it renders my pondering exceptionally moot. And yet, there are many times throughout our lives when we go beyond even an emotion as seemingly layered as empathy. We don't just parcel out grief when a loved one dies. We engage as a single entity, bridging gaps between any perceived disparity to comfort one another. But even during such times, we are capable of horrendous acts of callousness and ignorance, knowingly or otherwise. What Remains of Edith Finch is both an experiment in the art of demonstrating the most deep and reflective human emotions, and how to properly convey them in a way that highlights the strengths of storytelling within the medium of video games. As gamers, and human beings in general, we enjoy labels. They help us categorise and preempt. At best they prevent deception, and at worst they birth cynicism. Most will therefore label Edith Finch as a walking simulator. Whilst this is perhaps the most apt of analogies currently available to all audiences within the medium, it undercuts and misrepresents much of what games like Edith Finch are. You play the title character of Edith Finch as she journeys back to the eclectically designed home of her childhood in an attempt to hopefully uncover the mysteries surrounding generations of her family. What follows is not only a hugely compelling narrative experience, but also some impeccably smart design when it comes to how it's all communicated through simple gameplay mechanics. And yes, that's, I'm afraid, all the information I'm going to supply you with in terms of the game's narrative. What made me come back to the channel to do this video was not only a push from fellow channel member Dan, but also just how rare a game like Edith Finch is. I've been going through a bit of a dry patch recently. I can't remember what the last game I purchased was, only that it was around 6 months ago. This downhill relationship with the medium has been coming for a while now, and it relates almost entirely to the first sentence of this video. Why do I play video games? Or perhaps a more apt way of phrasing the question is, what do I want from everything in general? For a number of years now, I've been suffering from an untreated and largely professionally undiagnosed anxiety disorder. I can't really remember much of my life before this largely sudden realisation that my mind was in a state of unreparable ill health. I, like so many others with this unfortunate ailment, have often dismissed it as simply a symptom of just growing up, that everyone goes through something like this at one stage or another. This mindset, however, is conducive to nothing but a further decline into disrepair. I've learned to own, to accept, that it's as much a part of me as my constant longing for pizza and my unexplainable love for drum and bass. This change has informed in me many things. The desire for a strong, stable, normal relationship with a partner, an unfortunate, and some would unfortunately say overbearing obsession with details, and least of all, a longing to consume ever more expressive forms of storytelling. It is no coincidence that my love for video games coincides with the start of me deciding to self-medicate myself. However, this abrasive, insatiable longing for intriguing narrative became, well, even more abrasive and insatiable. I found less and less games were providing me with what I wanted, and that if anything, they had a lower hit rate of alluring stories when compared with other mediums, despite having more tools at their disposal to provide them. And so my interest just began to wane, despite there being numerous examples of games being the best way to communicate a compelling narrative. I started to play games simply for the time sink benefits of them, to keep my mind occupied and focused on something other than my moods. But what does this egotistical outburst of self-degrading emissions have to do with anything? Well, in my opinion, and you'd be surprised, it's less to do with me and more to do with what I think the beauty of objective critical analysis has to do with everything, specifically video games. My favourite games of the last 3 years have been games like Edith Finch, slow-paced, narrative-based journeys with minimalistic gameplay elements. I've come to the realisation that what I love about games is less to do with the act of gaming and more the process of participation in a tailored experience, to which Edith Finch is a perfect example. What it does almost better than any game I've played since Journey is communicate its world sense of place. Everything within it feels both highly tangible and immeasurably fantastical. It nails that sense of surreal juxtaposition we all experience every day between the prosaic real world and the blissful imaginings of our unchecked and unchained subconscious. To do that is not only prolific through words and images, but to communicate it through gameplay is infinitely more impressive. Edith Finch, I'm proud to say, does both, on many occasions at the same time. However, communicating narrative is only an extension of what this game does better than almost any other. It uses every tool at its disposal to relate to the player a story of nostalgia, a story of longing, a story of love, the impunity of death for those left to ponder it, the story of how the fear of loneliness can warp the mind in such depraved and unspeakably grievous ways that it turns good people into monsters of their own making. What Remains of Edith Finch is one of the few games that will actively change me as a person, that will brand me in such a way that it will make even my mental illness seem meagre by comparison. And I'll let it, because that's why I choose to play video games.